Hello and welcome to Kinzy's Crime Time. I am your host, Katie Kinzy, and this is going to be a new series where I dive into some true crime, some unsolved cases, things of that nature. It's something that's always interested me, and I decided why not talk about it on the internet in a podcast. So, my love of true crime is more so the why and why people do what they do. I was a psychology major when I started college. I was a social work major when I ended college. So you can kind of see my path there. Plus shows like Criminal Minds, CSI, even Law and Order, SVU. I have a love of people trying to figure out what happened to other people. So I thought we're going to do a different crime related thing, whether it's true crime, unsolved, like I said, every episode here. So we're going to start with one that most people have some general knowledge about and has been depicted or at least alluded to in some media, specifically American Horror Story, the first season, the Murder House season. And this is the case of the Black Dahlia. Now, trigger warning, things do get gruesome when I talk about this case. I have a little bit of background information on Elizabeth Short, that was her name, her family, kind of what she was going through, and then some conspiracies or theories, depending on how you look at it, on who could have possibly committed this gruesome act. Shall we begin? So a little bit of background here. This case alone is considered one of the oldest cold cases in Los Angeles. And when you start to hear the dates, you will understand why. So Elizabeth Short was born July 29th, 1924 in Boston, Massachusetts. She was the third child of 5 to Cleo Alvin Short Jr. and Phoebe May Sawyer. Cleo was a United States Navy sailor, and Phoebe was a housewife. In 1930, so the family had a relatively fine life, for the most part, from what I was able to figure out. Family life seemed relatively normal until 1930 here. Cleo's car, again, this is Elizabeth's father, his car was found abandoned on Charlestown Bridge, and everyone assumed he jumped into the Charles River. So when that happened, obviously Phoebe was left alone with 5 kids by herself, Elizabeth being one of them. They assumed their dad, her husband, was gone and just gone from this world. But no. We come to find out in 1942, so 12 years later, we find out that Cleo was alive, but he's living in California. We don't really know why he decided to just up and leave, but he did. And so Elizabeth, who had some issues with her mother when she was a teenager, not having a dad and all of these things that happened. At 18, Elizabeth decides to move out to Vallejo, California to live with her father. And the two of them did bicker quite a bit, and it did not go in the way that Elizabeth was hoping for, rekindling a relationship with your father. And so they did not stay together very long. So while she was in LA, Los Angeles, if you will, she was working as a waitress and decided to not be with her father anymore, rented a room behind the Florentine Gardens nightclub. And as most children do, she had aspirations of becoming an actress ever since she was just a little girl. And most people aspire to be an actress, a singer, a dancer, an astronaut, a cowboy. All of the things that children want to be when they grow up. And Elizabeth was determined to make her dreams come true. So there's a little bit of backstory into the family life and Elizabeth's journey to where we get on the morning of the discovery of Elizabeth Short. So around 10 a.m. on January 15th, 1947, a housewife, her name is Betty Bersinger, I'm apologizing now if any names are mispronounced, and her daughter were just walking through Los Angeles on Norton Avenue. They saw a body so white that Miss Bersinger thought that it was a mannequin. Now, this is where things get a little graphic. So again, apologizing, triggers. If you don't want to hear this, that is okay. The body was split in half, like at the midsection, and flesh was torn from the mouth into a terrifying smile. They called it a Glasgow smile. I believe I have information on that later. Hold on, I'm looking. I don't think I do. No, I don't. So flesh was torn from the mouth into a terrifying smile. People assumed and called it the Glasgow smile based off of murders that were happening in Glasgow at the time, around the same time frame, I should say, where similarly, think of like the Joker, Heath Ledger's Joker, where it's just up. You think of that, and that's what it looked like. Unfortunately, I have seen the crime scene photos. They're pretty graphic and terrible. And there was no blood anywhere on the scene. Now, typically when that happens, that means that she did not die there. She was obviously taken somewhere else, killed, and then brought to that location. So again, when people show up and you find a body that's cut in half and a crazy smile is formed, you have to identify the body somehow. So fingerprints did help identify the body because Elizabeth was arrested for underage drinking, and she applied for a job as a clerk at the commissary of Camp Cook. So she wanted to be like a clerk in an army base, basically. And because of the underage drinking arrest, they did have a mugshot, which that mugshot, famously, if you've seen it, if you search Black Dahlia, her face, what you see, I believe, was her mugshot. And so that mugshot was distributed to the media. Now here's the aftermath of the discovery here. So the media ripped Elizabeth Short to shreds. They called her a sexual deviant. Mind you, this is the 40s. It's not super surprising that they would be saying this stuff. Because, Elizabeth Short, she was 22 when she passed. She was seen with and knew many men before her death. They called her a teaser of men, a prostitute, and a lesbian. I don't know why. I've never understood why media takes victims of things like this. Not as much anymore, but a lot back in the day, specifically around this time frame, where they had no regard for the victims and kind of just said, yeah, she was a whore, she was a prostitute, all of this stuff. And like, no, even if she was, there's no excuse for what happened to her in any way, shape, or form at all. But so, how did Elizabeth Short become the Black Dahlia? The media gave her that nickname because she had short, dyed black hair, and she would wear, sheer black clothing. I mean, because black is one of the best colors to wear. Like, I get it, but nobody. And that's another thing with creating nicknames for people, killers or victims. You don't remember the real name, which is not. It's not fair to them. Specifically the victims. The killers, they thrive off of that. Some do. So a week after the body was discovered, an envelope was sent to the Los Angeles Examiner containing Elizabeth Short's personal belongings. Very much like, not with personal belongings, but Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper would send letters to people, whether it was news outlets like the Examiner or police themselves. The personal belongings included her birth certificate, just photos that she had on her person at the time, an address book that was not hers, and business cards. I'll get into some of that stuff later. And this was a cold case, and still is, 70 years. Which is... No, so this case has never officially been... what the fuck am I trying to say? Solved. This case has never officially been solved, so it technically is still a cold case. Just want to put that out there. So now, let's get into the suspects and the theories as to who could have done this terrible, gruesome, ugly thing. Some people believe that this murder was a link to the Cleveland torso murders that happened between 1934 and 1938. For those who don't know, the Cleveland torso murders was a serial killer, never named, never figured out who murdered and dismembered at least 12 victims, only 2 of which were ever positively identified. The killer, again, officially unidentified, yet researchers of today are quite certain who committed these horrible crimes. They did not tell me. But, so that's one theory. People think that with how she was dismembered, that it was very similar to the Cleveland torso murders. Which, understandable, very fair, similar MO. People also believed that this was connected, is the word, connected to the murder of Jean French. Again, I'm probably mispronouncing names, I apologize. Jean French on February 10th, 1947. This was called the lipstick murder. I couldn't find much about the lipstick murder, but I am determined to go back and look more into that specifically. But I didn't see a lot of weight behind that theory, I guess. This next one is definitely one of the biggest suspects and probably the most well-known suspect. I figured out this suspect, ironically enough, via Ghost Adventures, with the show with Zach Bagans, for those who are unaware. Dr. George Heidel. Now you're probably thinking, Katie, why would you assume a doctor would do this? All of that kind of stuff. Well, his son, Steve, who was a retired Los Angeles Police Department officer, found photos after his father died, found photos of women who looked like Elizabeth Short and or pictures of Elizabeth Short. And since there was a note written to the Los Angeles Examiner talking about her possessions and everything like that, a handwriting sample compared the killers to George Heidel's. It was inconclusive, but Steve was very determined. Like, he was dead set on his father being the killer, which is a crazy thing to think about. You go through your whole life and you find out that your father potentially is the killer of the oldest cold case in Los Angeles. So, the cut that was made on Elizabeth, oh, this is going to be hard to pronounce. Hymen corporectomy, a corporectomy, a hypicorectomy. I probably butchered that. Is when you slice a body under the spine, again, like how Elizabeth Short was. And his dad, being a doctor, had expansive knowledge of that surgery and how to do that. And I believe a lot of the medical reports are saying that it was a clean cut. So the person had to have had some medical background or some medical knowledge, which is typical when you have things like that. Hodel was also a suspect during the time of the murder on LAPD's list of suspects. They only had a few. I believe it was like 7 people, and George Heidel was on that list. So they bugged his phone, as the police do in the 40s when you're a suspect of a gruesome murder. And they heard a woman screaming in the background of one of these phone calls. And this is a quote from George Heidel. "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." Now, does that also mean George Heidel murdered his secretary and that was the woman screaming in the background? Again, these are unknown questions and answers that we have to this. George Heidel, again, one of the top suspects, one of the top theories of who could have done this. The other two, the two main ones, the last two main ones, I should say, Leslie Dillon and Mark Henson. You know, these two people. In 2017, Payu Eatwell, again, I'm butchering names and I apologize, wrote a book called The Black Dahlia, Red Rose, The Crime, Corruption, and Cover-Up of America's Greatest Unsolved Mystery. This author believed that there was a huge cover-up in the Black Dahlia's murder. And as I go through these, you'll kind of understand why they believe that. And I didn't know Dillon and Henson were suspects at all. I knew the George Heidel one, obviously, but looking into it, I was like, okay, I kind of understand why people believe this. So Dillon worked as a bellhop and was briefly a suspect. So he was on their list at one point, but nothing too crazy. It is believed, again, nothing is confirmed. These are all beliefs, accusations, and things of that nature. It is believed that Dillon murdered Elizabeth Short for Mark Henson, who was the nightclub owner. Now, remember when I said that Elizabeth left her father to go work as a waitress and rent a room. Florentine Gardens nightclub. And whose nightclub was that? Mark Henson's. So he was also a suspect, and a big reason why he was a suspect, because he was the owner of the address book that Elizabeth Short had when she was murdered, and that was sent to the Examiner. Obviously, if you see that, you kind of put things together and want to know why did she have his address book. He was also one of the last people to talk to Elizabeth Short. I believe it was a phone call, not a super long one, but a phone call at last. He was also infatuated with Elizabeth. He made advances to her repeatedly, and she continuously and always refused. I think that's also probably why the media assumed she was a lesbian, because she refused this high-class man's advances. Terrible. Terrible. Absolutely terrible. So Henson called Dylan to, quote, take care of her. Now, I mean, we've all seen crime movies, probably. Take care of her means, you know. And so Dylan had mortuary assistance experience. Remember when I said that the killer probably had some medical knowledge as to, the cut? Mortuary assistant. He also knew details about the crime before they were released to the public, which is crazy. But he said to police he was an aspiring crime writer who was working on the Black Dahlia case. But nothing came about that. Police looked into it, and he wasn't writing a book or wasn't working on the case. He was just lying to police, as they do. We did find I wasn't there. Police did find a potential possible crime scene, though, which was a hotel room, or I should say motel room. So the Astor Motel near the University of South California, was owned by Henry Hoffman. And this was a shady place from what I could tell, with, nothing being reported. And so one of the cabins was covered in blood and fecal matter. And then another cabin, so these are two separate cabins of this motel, had women's clothes covered in blood wrapped in brown paper. So what did Mr. Hoffman do? He cleaned up instead of calling the police, which is shady business. Shady business. And there were reports saying that a woman looking like Short was seen at this motel. I believe, I didn't write it down, but I believe that Henson was also seen near the motel at the time as well. There's just a lot of pieces to this that you very much assume that he was the one who did this. Well, I guess they both did. If Henson had Dylan do his dirty work, then they are both equally guilty, in my opinion. But that's all I have for this case. This is, again, one of those cases where it's so unknown that it's hard to kind of get a grasp on what truly happened. We know that she did not deserve it. We know that there are a few suspects at the time who could have done it, but we will never probably truly know what happened to Elizabeth Short, famously known as the Black Dahlia. But thank you guys so much for sticking with me and listening to me talk about true crime and this case. Let me know some other true crime cases or unsolved things you want me to talk about. I am going to put a poll on my Twitter. God, my back is so itchy. I'm going to put a poll on my Twitter and just a few things, like 2 or 3 options of what the next one I want to do is. I want to try and do these once every 2 months, give or take. This will be up for May because I waited too long and I was very busy in April. But I'm very happy that I got to do this and get this uploaded. So again, thank you guys for being here on the Patreon, for supporting Savannah and I as we kind of do wrestling content, but then no wrestling content at the same time. We talk about wrestling a lot, which you can do. Which you can watch. Twitch.tv/ShElite Showcase and YouTube.com/ShElite Showcase. You can watch us live every Thursday around 6:15 p.m. Eastern Time. We also have our website, ShEliteShowcase.com, where you can get yourself some merch. Maybe I'll put Crime Time on some merch and put it on the shop. We shall see. But again, thank you guys so much for Thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I hope you guys learned some new things and are interested in this series going forward. So until next time, bye-bye.